Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss next generation federal networks in government. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione, the Chief Information Officer with Department of Energy, Bob Costello, Executive Director, Enterprise Networks and Technology, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Jim Tannehill, Director, National Security, Verizon Business Group, Brian Moore, Division Chief, U.S. Department of State, Brian Wright, Director of Systems Engineering, Federal Ruckus Networks, Sanjay Gupta, Chief Technology Officer at SBA, and Don Parente, is the Assistant Vice President of Engineering and Architecture with AT&T. Well, this is a hot topic, a very important topic. The White House just issued a memorandum being dubbed TIC 3.0. I think maybe a couple of you on the panel here may have been very involved with the issuance of that. A lot to talk about today. I'm going to jump right into it. Rocky, you've been over there at Energy for a couple of months now. Energy is a big place, a lot going on, supercomputing, et cetera. Give us a state of the state on what you're seeing over there in the first couple of months.
Well, it's first I'd say it's great to be back at the Department of Energy. It's a great place, great mission, great people doing fantastic things. One of the things that, as I've come in, I'm starting to learn where are we, kind of what's the current state, what are our future plans. So I look across and we have, TIC 3.0, we're really excited about this. We've got some great pilots that we're starting about how do we how do we allow our mission folks to get to better access the network. We also have ESNet, which is the scientific network and kind of the backbone for what we do in the research field. It's 400 gigabit network, or going to 400 gigabits. We've got a 100 gigabit backbone. It goes all over the world. It's how we feed the large data from like the Large Hadron Collider in so that we can do the scientific research. And we also have 5G. Like, how are we going to handle 5G? How are we going to adopt it? But we have a unique mission at the Department of Energy of not just being a consumer of 5G, but also how do we promote the adoption and help give the United States a strategic advantage with 5G. So when we talk network, it's kind of a wide swath. We've got everything from the traditional, how do you make sure someone in the office gets internet, to how does someone in the field do their job better to carry out the mission, to how do we help promote science across the world and make the United States a leader in the world for scientific research. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about artificial intelligence, the big push that we have at the Department of Energy, and how do we make sure that our networks allow for our researchers to access big data to do research on AI, and how do we incorporate AI into our networks? And that's something we're still looking at.
Sure, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, et cetera. Every single subject, big data that we have on this show, completely reliant on a reliable, high-speed, integrated network. And I know, Bob, over there at CBP, you've got quite a complex environment with the trading community and the traveling public, and a very large footprint domestically and internationally. So give us a little state of the state as to how we're doing on networks over at CBP.
Well, Luke, thanks for having me today. And over the last year since we last spoke on this show, I think we've made a lot of improvements, and we've had I think some of the biggest changes that we've experienced at CBP is a retraining and a retooling on some of our people. So we're hiring a lot of software engineers into my organization now because everything's moving to a software-defined environment. We've had a wide-scale re-engineering of our network on the southern border that needed to happen, and we were kind of challenged earlier this year with some of our bandwidth down on the southern border, and we've rolled out to several hundred sites, large-scale bandwidth upgrades. We do operate at over 1,700 locations worldwide, so we're starting to roll out some new and innovative technologies to improve the security posture overseas and enable our officers or agents that are stationed overseas to directly access our resources. We've been working extremely hard to expand our connectivity to the different cloud providers and to kind of ease those connection models so that our program officers who do the development of software don't have to be constrained by the network.
Sure.
So we're doing things so that they can actually see what the connections look like, how much they're consuming on bandwidth, and then interface directly with us. One of my biggest challenges has been I oversee not just the networks, but the land mobile radio and our HF networks. So incorporating those technologies with our mobility platform that we oversee as well. So we've actually expanded our mobility user group from probably about 10,000 users from last year to up over 22,000 people. And we're moving very rapidly to pretty much get a phone on every officer or agent's belt, and that changes the environment. One of my big challenges that I think that we're going to see coming up is IoT. I work very closely and oversee portions of the program for non-intrusive inspection. So a lot of those things that were always never connected to the network, like an X-ray machine, some of our older camera systems, radiation detection equipment. Now those devices or systems are coming enabled to connect either to a network or be IoT-like. So we're really challenged right now in finding ways to securely get the telemetry from those systems and maybe not connect them to our primary network, but use some IoT gateways or other technologies to feed that data back to our system.
Yeah, and I mean just the convergence of all this technology together, and where any kind of device now is is very much requiring a high-speed type of network to function properly. Jim, you guys are right in the middle of that over at Verizon, and I know you're seeing a lot of activity out there across the community. Just give us a top line state of the state. What are you seeing out there in Verizon land, so to speak?
Well, I think the key is how do we enable mobility, right? As far as next gen with 5G is a big bet that Verizon's placing, and what is that going to enable as far as IoT or as across the allowing autonomous cars and robotics? The amount of money and effort that it takes to deploy 5G and to get the labs up and running is a challenge. We have beginning to roll it out. We'll have 30 cities rolled out of limited capability of 5G this year, and 5G is going to enable. We call it the fourth industrial revolution, where it'll bring in a lot of changes to the citizens, to industry, to government, things that we haven't even thought of yet. I mean, one of the things that we talked about earlier this year is how do you do robotic surgery? How do you do different things? And all that requires incredibly low latency, huge amounts of bandwidth, and it's a very interesting time, very exciting time to be in industry.
Yeah, I was reading an article the other day, and they said there's certain technologies that once they're introduced, there's things that get discovered, enabled, and done that you hadn't even thought about because you have the power of this capability. And 5G was one of those that they pointed out. Brian, talk about a footprint, and talk about a big footprint, a global footprint. You guys are right smack in the middle of that over there at State. So give us a state of the state of State as to how we're doing on from a network perspective. I know CBP, if I recall, teams up with State to making sure that they're getting into all those embassies worldwide. So there's just yet another example, some collaboration that's going on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we partner with a number of agencies to help provide services and facilitate different types of connectivity. As you said, it is kind of a unique mission with the footprint that we have and the challenges that come with that. About 10 years ago, we really embarked on taking a hard look at the way the applications and application developers were evolving and undertook kind of a whole holistic look at the network. What it forced us to do was to really look at re-architecting the topology. We were a traditional hub and spoke type architecture, and that just didn't fit any longer as application owners were more regionalizing applications. So we had pivoted to more of a regionalized type of approach, still kind of a statically configured environment, but more of a regionalized approach. More recently, we've looked at that, and with the expansion of off-prem assets with the cloud and the multi-cloud ecosystem that we're developing, as well as multi-agency collaboration and connectivity, it really caused us to kind of rethink the whole static regionalized approach, that in itself wasn't working well. So we then now evolved into more of what we call a dynamic environment. So it's more of a policy-based, any-to-any type connectivity where your post, your workstation can find the best route to get to the asset, whether it be cloud, whether it be on-prem. So if it's located in a regionalized data center, if it's located in CONUS, if it's out in the cloud, it gives you the most expedient route to get there. So that gives us the flexibility now to be able to meet these emerging requirements.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you're wrestling with all of these various telecom companies in all these countries across the globe, right? And having to do all this hand-to-hand combat, if you will, with these various regions. And all of a sudden, here comes the cloud. I know you guys, I think, probably an early adopter of that because it probably solved a lot of the problems that you were having out there from a global standpoint. Brian, how about at Ruckus Networks? You guys are right smack in the middle of this, enabling all of this revolution to happen. Give us a state of the state.
So it's interesting. It's a reoccurring theme. I think in the next two speakers, I think will echo some of the things that have been said before. You know, networking is changing at a rapid pace. 5G is going to be a term that you're going to hear over and over and over. It's coming. It's rapidly approaching. You know, there are things that are changing within the mobility spectrum, not just from a LTE perspective with 5G, but also in the local area and in some cases the metropolitan area network with things like Wi-Fi 6. You know, it's the next generation of 802.11, right? So you've got 5G coming, you've got Wi-Fi 6 that's coming, you've got unlicensed spectrum use cases with things like CBRS that are used to provide mobile connectivity to our users and employees to allow them to better fulfill their mission, their mission statements.
Sure, and just almost leapfrog over some of this, you know, sort of legacy technology and legacy networks that we're talking about. Sanjay, I talked at the beginning of the show about TIC 3.0, and what I'm excited about there is just the ability for agencies to sort of open up the aperture and look at different ways to implement the, you know, adhering to the policy, but implement things in a different kind of way, take advantage of some of this technology that's available. And I know SBA's been right in the front of that, so why don't you give us a little bit of an update as to how things are going over there at SBA?
Sure, thank you, yes. So we were one of the agencies at the SBA which embarked on the 90-day modernization pilot for the TIC last year. So we were quite eagerly waiting for the 3.0 policy to come out.
Sure.
And I think one of the things we were able to do was inform how we could use some cloud-based tools to meet the objectives and the goals and the intent of the TIC goals and be able to still meet the intent without really implementing the architecture. But let me kind of talk a little bit from a network standpoint, because network is really key to everything we do. And so one of the things we are looking at right now is if you think about, you know, cloud service providers, the CSPs, each of them have multiple regions throughout the country. And each of them obviously have a high-speed connectivity between region to region. So what we are looking at and exploring right now is how we could leverage the existing connectivity these CSPs have. And some of these CSPs actually are providing a way to access them. So for instance, you get from your local office to the nearest region using some ISP. And from there, you could ride their backbone, which is a very high-speed connectivity, right?
Right.
It changes the whole paradigm of the network connectivity model, right? And it sort of leapfrogs us from where we have traditionally been in like an MPLS network standpoint. They already have those networks. They're high-speed, high bandwidth, high performance. And if they give you a solution which is secure and allows them to access that, that is quite revolutionary from our standpoint. So in addition, just from a security standpoint, obviously we are doing the SD-WAN implementations as well, but we are also looking at zero trust networks because you have to make sure your foundation is secure, it's reliable, it's high performing. Because increasingly the load on the network is going to be increasing as we go through more SaaS services or PaaS services where you are relying on the network to connect to your cloud sources. So that's the state of the affairs from our standpoint.
Sure, and the network it needs to be like electricity, right? You just need to turn it on, it needs to be there. And I would imagine that whole regional concept you're talking about there is certainly ports its way over globally, right? Don, how about at AT&T? You all are right smack in the middle of this revolution, if you will. Give us a state of where AT&T is as far as enabling these capabilities.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating. We talk a lot about modernization, with the government, IT modernization. And you know, there's always that adage of building the aircraft in flight, but the reality of it is, you know, government doesn't shut down for remodeling, right? And we're not building the airplane in flight where we're taking off with a propeller plane, and by the time we land, it's going to have a jet engine on it, and that's really challenging, right? Sure. So when we look at what's going on with network, all the things that everyone has stated so far is true. 5G is going to be a big deal. Software-defined networks is going to be a big deal. You know, networks that are programmable. But right now, today, and you heard Bob mention it, bandwidth is an issue, right? And keeping up with those demands. I think the growth in bandwidth that we've seen in the last decade has been like nothing we've ever seen before. I always say that, you know, when the day my mother, who's in her 70s, called me and said I need more bandwidth, I knew the world was fundamentally changing.
Grandma's calling next, right?
Yeah, FaceTime wasn't working right. You know, so some of the things that we've seen, and I think are exciting and are sort of the building blocks for getting that network to being that high bandwidth, high performing, secure network are the big upgrades from TDM to IP, right?
Sure.
Going from those old T1 based networks to Ethernet and natively IP based networks. So big changes there, but really setting the foundation for what I think is going to be major transformation over the next 10 to 15 years. And fortunately, you know, we have a vehicle out there called EIS that I think is going to enable agencies to do that.
Right, you know, and just having that connectivity and that bandwidth in these very disparate types of environments that are very rural, very important. I know CBP has a lot of that, and certainly State has a lot of that. Brian at State, let's swing over to you. Tell us about a specific program that you'd like to highlight that may be of interest to the listening audience, is something that you guys have rolled out there and perhaps you're proud of, and is really enabling State to do its mission.
Right. So I mean, as you said, the network's kind of the utility, right? So it is the foundational enabler for all the applications, and so all applications benefit from the changes we've made and we continue to make on the network as we increase bandwidth and we lower latency, as we move to this more dynamic routed environment and look at ways to optimize the connections to the off-prem type assets. Some of the things that we've seen with the changes that we've made, moving from the regionalized architecture to more of the dynamically routed architecture, real-time video and collaboration performance has gone up quite drastically. That's partly a factor of decreasing the latency and increasing bandwidth, but also because of the optimized routing. And the real-world type applications, when you're dealing with real-time video at State, you're dealing with real security situations like the security video coming back live from the embassies.
Right.
So this is not just talking heads and video conferencing, which is very important.
Sure.
But it's real, in some cases, life or limb, or at the very least, law enforcement forensic type data that's needed in real time.
Yeah, and you talk about real-time situational awareness type environments where the network needs to be there and it needs to have the capacity to transmit that. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione with Department of Energy, Bob Costello with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Jim Taneyhill with Verizon, Brian Moore with Department of State, Brian Wright with Ruckus Networks, Sanjay Gupta with SBA, and Don Parente with AT&T. We're talking about next generation federal networks. We were talking about specific programs. I'm going to throw it over to you, Jim, and tell us about a specific program that Verizon's working on that would be of interest to our listening audience, perhaps.
Well, we've talked an awful lot about 5G as a next generation enabling technology, and we've created several labs around the world. One of them here in DC where people can come in and play with different applications. Another one is in Rocky's world out at PNNL, where we're establishing a 5G lab to look at the different technologies and the different players that you can bring in. One of the things that we've seen already is in the first responder world that the artificial intelligence, the virtual reality, the augmented reality capabilities that 5G enables allows a firefighter to go into a completely smoke-filled arena and still have visibility using different capabilities. So those are the kind of things that we're seeing right now, and the lab environment where you can get all these people together and try new technology seems to be a good building block approach.
Yeah, again, I was talking about that article where this is such a powerful capability that people are just trying to get their heads around, how to even enable, some of these capabilities that they hadn't even thought about now that they have this type of functionality available to them. Sanjay, how about at SBA? You guys are doing some really cool stuff over there. Why don't you give us an example of one specific area that you've sort of, quite frankly, brought the entire community forward with some of the things you guys are doing at SBA?
Yeah, great, thank you. I'll give you probably more than one example real quick. So one of the things that we have implemented, or rather in the process of implementation, is always on virtual VPN. So that allows you to be connected onto VPN if you're not in the SBA network. So obviously that's a productivity improvement from a user standpoint within the SBA network. But I'll give you a more important example in terms of converged networks, where we're converging voice and data networks, and we're talking about things like virtual counseling. So small businesses, entrepreneurs visit a SBA office trying to get to understand what's the process of getting certifications or loan assistance. And so what we're trying to implement right now is a program where individuals should not have to actually make what we call is windshield time, driving to an office, but be able to do virtual counseling using technologies that allow you to sort of see the people and as well converse with the people using those standard solutions that are available in the marketplace. And that's where the voice and data converged networks are helping. So we're looking at from a citizen facing standpoint so that they can easily converse with SBA, interact with SBA using things like virtual counseling.
Yeah, it's almost SBA's version of telemedicine, if you will, right?
There you go.
Where you can do these things remotely and have the same functionality, have that same experience. Don, how about at AT&T? Why don't you give us an example of something specific, a program that you all are working on? I know there's a whole bunch of them that you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, so a couple of things going on. First and foremost is around the area of software-defined networks. I mean, this is a journey that in many respects we kicked off now 6 years ago. I think we kicked the industry off, quite frankly. And we're on this pace of having the network 75% virtualized by 2020, actually. So we're doing great stuff there. And so much of the work that we've done in terms of research and development has now found its way into the open source community to become available to others to use. In particular, a program called ONAP, which is the Open Network Automation Platform, which it's open source. We developed that code to build out our software-defined network and rolled it out in the open source community, so to kind of move the entire industry forward. The other is in the area of FirstNet. Speaking of first responders, I think everyone's aware of FirstNet, but some of the critical mission elements of FirstNet is getting coverage to the scene when it's needed. Often when you have a tragedy, a disaster, the infrastructure goes down, and we're really redefining what deployables look like in the world of FirstNet, bringing out drones to provide self-service and that sort of thing. So a lot of exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, it's interesting when you digitize this environment and then take it to the next level and sort of infrastructure as code, if you will, all of a sudden you can deploy these capabilities. That's just unbelievable, some of the things that you can do there. Rocky, how about at Energy? Why don't you give us an example of some of the supercomputing that's going on over there? Gosh knows what kind of capabilities you guys are up to these days. So,
well, I'll talk a little bit about supercomputing and how we're using the world's fastest computers and some of the world's biggest minds to help solve kind of veterans issues and health issues.
Did you guys go quantum on us?
Some of our organizations do a lot within quantum.
Yeah, sure.
At the CIO's office itself, I'm probably not there yet, but when you get out to our labs, they're doing a lot of great stuff in quantum.
Right.
I'm actually blessed with those great minds doing the R&D of, so having an understanding of what I might see on our network 10 years from now, we're developing in our national labs. We talk about 5G, we're working with multiple vendors across the complex, building out a 5G test bed. Idaho National Lab's a major player within that. PNNL is a major player in that. It was actually the first lab I visited was PNNL, and it was one of the first things they showed me is their 5G test bed, or the 5G lab. So it's interesting because I have that research arm that looks at the future, and then I have the blessings of figuring out how do I take that research and implementing it within our day-to-day productivity network. And that's a fun problem to have. It's always fun when our consumers of our services are actually developing the services of the future and think, why can't you? And but that's one of the areas that it's fun to be at DOE about. But another area is TIC 3.0. We're starting our pilot in Q1 of the next fiscal year for our productivity suite, like the software as a service. How do we enable our end users anywhere they are within the country, within our complex, to rapidly get to kind of their email and collaboration suite? It's built off of the TIC overlay pilot that occurred last year.
Right.
I think we saw a 60% increase in kind of the speed and the ability to access the network within that, because our folks didn't have to come all the way back to DC.
Right.
It's kind of that network hop. How do we get directly out there? But that's one of the big exciting things we're doing within our shop, within the complex. I think I could be here about 5 hours.
Sure. I mean, energy really does have that dual sort of role of, petri dish lab, creation and development of this capability. And then, of course, as a traditional CIO, you've got to roll these capabilities out and expand things like TIC overlay, et cetera. Bob, how about at CBP? Give us an example of a program there, state of the state, in regards to something that you've rolled out that you want us to be aware of.
I think one of the most important things that we've rolled out has focused on our ability to be resilient at the network level. And I'm kind of calling it like SDN 0.1 that we've rolled out. So we kind of now have the ability, because as you can imagine, many of our locations, it's a law enforcement mission. We have almost 45,000 sworn law enforcement officers that are inspecting, people, cargo. We go down, an airport could shut down.
Sure.
People don't get processed correctly, the trade community stops. So many of our sites now operate, maybe primarily over a very high-speed internet connection. If that goes down, we fail to MPLS. If that goes down, at many sites, we fail over to a 4G connection, and can maintain operations so that we don't fail over. And this happens seamlessly. The officers don't see anything. Our field operatives that work for the CIO's office don't have to go out and flip cables or anything. And that's been a game changer, because I'm able to now provide a better service to our operators, and that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah, better service to the citizens, right?
Exactly, absolutely. So it's been a huge game changer. I think the other area that we've moved to a lot is our ability to provide a mobility platform that's easy to interface with. And now many of our officers and agents have a device on their belt that they can authenticate back to our systems and actually perform many of the same functions that they were doing at a workstation. So in many cases, this has allowed our officers and agents to get out from behind that workstation and be interfacing directly with the people. Coming off the aircraft, they can query travel documents, see what's going on right there. We can do things at the cargo ports that we never could before. We're pushing out on something called remote operations, which allows us to have an understanding of what's happening at the port, and the cargo containers coming without an officer in every lane anymore, with no decrease in security. But as these technologies roll out, the operators are able to redeploy their people to the law enforcement mission or the inspectional mission. And this helps the Office of Trade as well, because if we provide better services to the trade community, then it just helps across the board. It helps everything from the economy to security. Those are the things that I'm really most proud of that we've done.
Right, getting that workforce out on the edge. I think 85% of your workforce is mobile. And I think a lot of people don't understand CBP. They're right smack in the middle of the economy of the United States of America, right? So you want a primary, a secondary, a tertiary environment there. Brian at Ruckus, how about give us an example of something that you guys are doing over there, a program that you guys are running that you'd like to highlight that's sort of right in the mix of this capability here? You brought up a couple of fascinating things earlier.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One big thing is secure access, right? So and that applies to any government organization, any private industry. Secure access. There's currently over 8 billion IoT devices connected to the internet today. IoT Analytics is saying that number will rise to 22 to 23 billion by the year 2025. Those, in many cases, as Bob pointed out, are headless devices. They're sensors, they're cameras, they're devices that have no means of configuration on the device itself. The best you can do is push a certificate to the device. You've got to be able to securely onboard those onto your network. You've got to be able to secure their access to the network, but you've also got to be able to provide the backbone that provides the throughput and the necessary capacity for those devices, whether they be HD cameras, radiation sensors, personnel monitors. We've got a massive border, in the Southwest that we've got to manage and maintain. Bob's team's full of officers that are doing that. In some cases, there's sensors that are replicating and taking the place of some of those officers because we just don't have enough bodies to cover the space. And so in order to bring those devices onto a network in a secure means, you've got to be able to provide a means to onboard them in a quick manner so that they can be installed when needed, and in some cases on the fly. You've got to be able to provide the backbone. 5G is a great technology for that. 5G is going to provide the bandwidth, capacity, and security that we're looking for in situations like this. One thing that we're noticing with 5G is the footprint shrinks a bit, right? You're not getting the same coverage that you get with 4G. So how do you offset some of that? Wi-Fi 6 is a possible alternative. I mentioned CBRS earlier, private LTE networks, non-licensed spectrum that's available and in use today.
Yeah, and I think about things like body-worn cameras, and it's just these officers and agents and employees just become their own IoT, sort of configuration there. It's pretty incredible. Well, let's switch over to lessons learned. I know I love this question because it's really important that the listening audience hears about, lessons learned, positive lessons learned, negative lessons learned. I'm going to start with you, Don, at AT&T. You all are out there helping a lot of these agencies adopt a lot of these capabilities, early adopters out there using these different types of technologies. What's some lessons learned that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the most important lesson learned is don't go it alone, right? So, I have a team of engineers and architects that are available to sit down and work with agencies and, do anything from brainstorm the art of the possible to actually put pen to paper and design a network. So, we, as an industry, right, even AT&T doesn't go it alone, right? We're part of standards groups, we're part of communities like Metro Ethernet Forum and 3GPP. So as an industry, we don't go it alone, and I think it's really critical that government not go it alone and leverage partners like AT&T to, let us help you find the latest and greatest technology. Let us help you figure out the best way to apply it. Because as you mentioned earlier, there's just so much going on, and every single thing you want to do from a mission effectiveness and mission support point of view depends on the network. And it's really critical that the network is sized in a way that's going to support those applications, and it has the right level of availability, reliability, and security.
Sure, and don't go it alone with your vendor partners, and don't go it along with your other agencies.
Yeah.
Brian at State, why don't you give us an example of some lessons learned if you guys have rolled out some of these capabilities, what you've discovered there?
Well, first, I don't think there's ever enough bandwidth. It's always
Sure,
going to
yeah.
be
They always want more.
no bandwidth amount
Even
is
mom
too
and grandma
much.
want more.
And also, no amount of low latency is good enough as well.
Yeah.
So, it's always going to be a constant strive to increase the bandwidth and lower the latency, especially as these more real-time applications pivot to the cloud. That becomes more and more important. One of the key things that we learned is really you have to understand your traffic flows. We have general design principles and architecture principles of how we design the network, but you truly have to understand with your individual mission what those traffic flows look like and understand your data. Where is your data coming from? Where does it go? The whole life cycle of your data. Because in order to make the network that utility, it's got to support that, and the only way it can do that is with truly understanding those flows.
Right, and really getting good instrumentation in there I think is super important. Jim, how about at Verizon? You all are helping a lot of these agencies roll out these capabilities. Been doing it for a long time. There's a lot of early adoption stuff out there. Give us some lessons learned that agencies and the listening audience ought to be thinking about and considering.
Well, as we've gone down the path to do a lot of virtualization and SDX, software-defined network, software-defined perimeter, we've taken a lot of automation in the network and kind of reduced the number of people. So we have less people doing tasks that used to be done by more. One of the things that we've learned in the we have a program in November called Operation Convergent Response, where we sponsor a bunch of first responders to come in different situations. It could be a subway disaster, it could be a flood, and how to use all these technologies together in a secure bubble that now allows the first responders from various different organizations to share information and get better situational awareness. So.
Yeah, and really start to focus on you know, the state of the network in all kinds of different dynamic environments. Sanjay, how about at SBA? You guys are early adopting a lot of different types of capabilities. I'm sure you have some lessons learned that you'd like to communicate with your fellow agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll list out two specifically here. There's probably many more. First and foremost, like we talked about, connectivity is critical to everything we do, especially if you're moving to the cloud. Connectivity, high-speed connectivity, high-bandwidth connectivity is really crucial for making sure you're able to use your cloud service providers' resources. So one of the things we learned was it took relatively a longer time to establish the peerings with the CSPs and establish the connectivity. So if you are looking to go to the cloud, I would suggest plan for a little longer time. One of the things we found out was, like Don was saying earlier, that you have to partner with your network providers or your CSPs, obviously. One of the things we are recognizing is that the number of people who are skilled in doing the peering configurations at all, if you will, touch points are a relatively small number of people. So coordinating, if you will, a call, just an example, between a network service provider and your CSP and your internal team becomes a challenging act itself, because there are not many people who understand how to do the configuration and the peerings. That would be number one, really, to be keeping in mind in terms of a lesson. The second lesson learned, I would say, is that keeping in touch with the changes in the technology, because we are moving really so rapidly, and the network service providers and the CSPs come up with new solutions. So that would be the second thing I'd say.
Yeah, and just that reskilling and making sure that people are staying up, something that Bob pointed out just a little while ago. We're going to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione with Department of Energy, Bob Costello with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Jim Tannehill with Verizon, Brian Moore, Department of State, Brian Wright with Ruckus Networks, Sanjay Gupta with SBA, and Don Parente with AT&T. We were talking about lessons learned. And Bob, I'm going to throw it over to you at CBP. I know you guys probably have a whole bunch of lessons learned there, but maybe you can share one or two with the listening audience, plus or minus.
Sure, Luke. I appreciate that. I think one of the biggest lessons learned, I've been in my role currently with CBP in this particular role for about 2 years, is as technologists, we love the latest and greatest technology. My job is to deploy technology that works for the operators and works for the mission. Sometimes that's not the latest and greatest. So to us, 4G is going to be with us a long time. We're super excited about 5G and the capabilities that it's going to deliver. Many of my locations don't have 4G today, so it's unlikely that they'll have 5G, in the near term. So one of the lessons that we've learned is understanding the requirements of the people that we support and making sure that we're embedded with them. That my teams, I've changed the organization I run, and my team is out there in the field all the time with Border Patrol or the Office of Field Operations or our other mission partners. So what we're deploying now is technologies that are highly resilient, that are well tested, and that fulfill the mission. So we've gotten a better understanding of what our operators need from connectivity and networks, and we're delivering on those solutions. So we're innovating at the same time and deploying some elements of SDN. We're deploying mobility solutions. One of the most exciting things that I'm really thrilled with right now is we're deploying a platform from one of our vendors that allows us to completely model and understand and enact changes on our network offline and see how that's going to affect things. And then we can go into our change windows with an extremely high level of confidence that our change is going to work. Because I can no longer afford to build a lab that simulates a network as large as ours. We're probably in the industry would be considered a medium-sized network, about 11,000 routers and switches, but is quite large, for us. And I can't simulate that entire environment with all our external connections, which number in the thousands for the trade community, and how we reach the internet and our mission partners in DHS and external. We do a lot of work with PNNL. And now, exactly. And now I can actually have an exact replica of my network offline and train my staff on it, simulate changes. And we're ensuring a much higher level of reliability to our customers.
And integrity, and not using the operational network as your lab, right?
Exactly.
We've all been through that before. Brian, how about at Ruckus Networks? Can you give us an example of the lessons learned there?
Yeah, so tighten up your track shoes, get ready to run.
Yeah.
5G's coming, Wi-Fi 6 is here, CBRS is available today. These are technologies that are going to enable the advancement and the speed, with obviously with some caveats. There are some locations that this is not going to play well in, but then others, these are the technologies that are coming. Your users, your employees are getting this technology at home. They're going to have it in their communities. They're going to expect it in their workplaces. It's not a bad thing. It's going to make them more efficient. They're going to be able to do more with less.
Sure. Rocky, I know you've only been over there a couple of months, but one lesson learned, something that you're thinking about that you've observed?
Well, one of the things is, I'll kind of talk about what Bob was talking about. It's sometimes the latest and greatest isn't always what you need to deploy.
Sure.
So sometimes it's take a breath. Deploy what you have, finish your project out. You don't always want to be on the bleeding edge on a production network. So that would be kind of the one lesson learned is let's stop, let's complete what we have going on today. Let some of the newer technologies mature a little bit. Make sure that we have a use case before we deploy it,
right,
and then deploy.
Yeah, it's really important that you do both, right? You have to keep your eye on that new technology so you can incorporate it, but you got to make sure that your base is covered today, right? And your operation is running, your mission's being enabled. All right, well, we're going to start at the end there with you, Don. We like to talk about painting a picture of the future. What does this look like in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? What can the agencies expect as we roll out these different types of technology, not in the Petri dish so much, but stuff that'll be operationalized at that point?
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a lot, but I'll say it again because it's going to be a big part of it, and that is 5G. And one of the reasons 5G is going to make such a big impact is it's really going to enable the proliferation of connected devices. We talk about IoT today. In the 5G world, we're talking massive IoT. And I know IoT, sort of generically, a lot of people hear the term. It's sort of a buzzword, but at the end of the day, IoT is about collecting data, a lot of data, and doing it in real time, and then taking, the intelligence on that data and saying, what do I do with it? How do I react to it? And so it's really IoT that's going to enable all that, very rapid decision making that has to be done by the mission.
Right, being able to collect it, move it at speed, and do it reliably.
Exactly.
Sanjay, if I'm a small business owner and I'm trying to submit an application, what does that experience look like in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Maybe I'll take a slightly different spin on that, Luke.
Sure.
Is about networks. So if you think about the problem we were facing with compute infrastructure, say 3-5 years ago, long time to provision, get it set up, a fixed price cost model, I think you know where I'm going with.
Yeah.
The cloud service providers and the consumption-based cost model. Today, our networks are sort of in the old model, quite frankly. You know, it takes a long time to provision. It's a fixed cost model. So what I'm proposing is, or at least I'm hoping, one of our network service providers will soon come up with a network as a service.
Are you challenging our
I am
partners here?
absolutely
I love
challenging
it.
our network service providers to say, come up with network as a service, as
Yes.
opposed to the fixed cost model. It's a consumption cost model. It's pay-as-you-go model. It's available when you want to use it, as opposed to the long time it takes to provision your networks. That's a fundamental change, a game changer, like the cloud did in the compute side. So I'm hoping one of the network service providers will provide that service offering very soon.
I certainly don't want to
And
answer
that'll
for
revolutionize
them.
everything we do.
But I do, and that's a great case of something like 5G, where perhaps some of that embedded technology inherently that's in there will allow those types of things to happen that people haven't even thought about. Brian, how about at Ruckus Networks? Give us a picture of what's it going to look like out there in 3 or 4 years? What are you all going to be rolling out? What do you think your customers are going to be asking for, demanding at that point?
So a lot of what we're seeing today, a robust, secure mobile compute environment where users, regardless of whether they're visitors to your facility or employees at your facility, have immediate access to the resources that they're authorized based on certificates, passwords or whatever within their device itself. Access onto their network and the resources that they require immediately.
Yeah, I think that the ability to connect real time and do it in a way that's intelligent, right, is going to be super important. People are just going to expect that, and I'm sure they're going to be embedding that into their applications and require that. Brian, how about at the State Department? If I'm a freshly minted Foreign Service officer on my way overseas, what can I expect? What does that experience look like 2 to 3 years from now?
From the network perspective, it's going to be a completely different landscape. We're in the process right now in the conceptual phases of a complete re-architecture of the network to a zero trust model. That's going to be huge and change pretty much everything that we do. Under that zero trust architecture model, we'll be implementing SDN, SD-WAN, fully orchestrated, which is a big change for us, considering all the changes now are manual, which allows us to do a number of things, provision things faster, be able to respond to when we have security incidents and have to make changes. So pretty excited about that. Also, we'll be implementing microsegmentation so that in order to reduce our threat surface, make sure that we can limit horizontal movement, which is going to be a big one. From the outside, we're really interested in LEO, the low Earth orbit technology and satellite. That's going to allow us to be able to reach areas we have difficult or extremely expensive satellite bandwidth to get into now with much, much lower latency that's approaching terrestrial rates, which will give us functionality we've never been able to reach at certain places. So that's big excitement for us.
Right, and the constellation of LEOs that they're putting out there is just incredible right now. That's just being deployed. So I would imagine someone like State Department would really take advantage of that type of capability as a map across the globe. Well, Jim, Sanjay has laid the gauntlet down for you there. Tell us what it looks like out there. I know you've talked about 5G. And perhaps you can tell us when we would expect that. What does that look like in 3 to 5 years, whether it's 5G or any of the other capability that you all are rolling out, making available for the agencies to enable their missions?
Yeah, so first of all, Sanjay, we'd be happy to talk to you about network as a service, so feel free. And but where we see the industry going is a totally wireless edge. And we see with 5G or even how you're going to use 4G in the future as we offload things, is there's going to be a lot more bandwidth, and what that does is it reduces the provisioning time dramatically. So today, if I have to go install 2 gig or 5 gig capability to someone, I might have to procure things, I might have to dig up a street, I might have to, it could be 90 days or longer.
On the back end.
We're talking 90 minutes for provisioning, right, under 5G. So that alone will be a dramatic shift in rapid deployment and using capability. So we see the edge as being very wireless. And one of the things that makes that happen is mobile edge compute. You got to do your computing closer to the edge of the network. You do all the access into your cloud service provider. So these are the things that we see coming in the very near future.
Yeah, and I would imagine that not only you have that sort of real-time provisioning. I think about, if you think 10 years ago or 20 years ago, just trying to get your phone number ported, right? And now you just, it's a no-brainer, right? Provisioning a phone now is much easier. And I think once you walk everything over into that wireless environment, you're going to be able to enable a lot of capability. Bob, how about at CBP? What does the future look like? If I'm an agent down there on the border, or I'm in the seaport or airport, or up in a cargo facility, what does that experience look like as you all, sort of repro your network over the course of 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think what it really means to me is a very pervasiveness. And 5G is a big part of that. Wi-Fi 6 is a huge part of that. And what we really want is seamlessness. So that's where really the zero trust comes in. What I kind of equate that to when I'm explaining it to some people is it's identity based. I need to be able to say who this person is accessing my network so that they get the right resources. So right now we're at the stage where it was something that Don was talking about too. It's all about telemetry, really. And as I start collecting more and more information from the network and the devices on that, IoT, people connecting to my network, devices connecting to my network, I almost envision in some ways is that the CBP network is going to so dramatically change so that people don't even know that they're connecting to the network. So that it's not this difficult thing. There's not this VPN where you're typing in a password or a PIV card. It's based on who you are, and we're identifying you, hopefully with biometrics, to get access to the resources that you need. And where I really see that changing is this quick switch between different connectivity models, so that the officers are not getting frustrated as they move from inside the facility to outside the facility. The device that they're on makes that quick switch, whether it goes to 5G, Wi-Fi 6, plugged into a workstation that's maybe still, or a docking station that's still on a cable. Maybe it has a quick fail to 4G in areas that are still serviced by that. So where I really hope to get is, I kind of joke sometimes when I'm briefing people, I want my network so good and so pervasive that you never have to know my name. That the deputy commissioner at CBP's just knows that things are going to work wherever our people are stationed. And Brian brought up some good things. I struggle providing good network connectivity overseas, and that's the most critical place from maybe a danger perspective. Sometimes we have people operating in very dangerous locations,
right? And
I want them to have the same resources, the same access to our systems as if that officer was here, in CONUS. So I think that could be a really critical change for us.
Right, and also reliably, right?
Reliable.
To have that capability and ensure that it's there. They're sort of on their own out there, right? In some cases. Rocky, how about over at Energy? What does that environment look like for you all in 3 to 4 years?
Absolutely. I think Don hit on some key points for the consumers. It's that from that IoT speed, the use of the ability to make quick decisions. You can't be at Department of Energy and now talk about artificial intelligence. But there's two sides to it, right? Not only what Don was talking about is, we have using AI at the edge, kind of with when you talk about IoT and speed and making sure we have the bandwidth and the information. But a key component of what DOE is doing, and Sanjay, I'll use a term I think you've used before, is we produce AI. We have the brain power to create the next algorithm, the brain power and the hardware on the supercomputers to really kind of push that forward. So I look at it as, not only do I want to make sure that we can use AI at the edge, I want to make sure that I'm capturing that data so that our producers have good, rich information, or good, rich data. It's labeled, it's structured, that they can produce the next great algorithm to really push AI forward. So it's interesting to me because, we want to make sure it's out there and we're doing great things. I also want to make sure I'm capturing the exabytes and, of data coming in so that we can kind of move forward as a country with AI.
Fantastic. Quick turbo round here. I'm going to ask you, Sanjay. I'll ask a couple of the feds. Biggest barrier out there to enable this capability, this picture that you painted?
I think
Number one.
Well, you know, the traditional three domains, people, process, technology, people, process tend to be the biggest challenges.
Brian.
Technology is the easiest one.
Got it. Brian State.
Funding, if I wouldn't be a government employee if I didn't bring that one up immediately. Funding, of course, is always going to be
Sure.
a concern. But also the fact that with Zero Trust, there's a lot of point solutions that are out there, but it's still kind of an evolving space and it's maturing. So getting the different vendors to play together into what's a holistic solution that really meets the needs of the department.
Perfect. Bob, number one issue.
Number one issue, and you know, perhaps that we don't always have enough funding to do what we do, but I think we have a very big enabler at CBP. From the commissioner on down, they support innovation and our commitment to utilizing IT to accomplish the mission. So I think when you have that from the highest levels, you can start breaking down a lot of the other barriers that might be presented.
There you go. And Rocky, since you've only been there a couple of months, we're going to give you a pass on that.
I had a good one too.
Well, please.
Imagination.
Imagination. Fantastic. Well, this has been a great show, and I'd like to thank all of our guests for the time that they've taken out of their busy schedules to join us today. I'd like to thank our sponsors for without we don't have a show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.